Today's episode of the podcast is brought to you by Discount Supplements. Discount Supplements are Ireland's largest retailer of sports nutrition and health foods, and they've been helping their customers achieve their fitness goals over the last 12 years and are an Irish family-run business. Personally, I've been using Discount Supplements for years. So for those of you who've been following me since the very beginning on, say, Instagram or Facebook, these are the company that I always tag, particularly if you're in Ireland. They've got great prices, their products always arrive on time, and if you're lucky, sometimes you get a little bit of a freebie if you have an order of a certain amount or more. So I can't recommend them enough. If you need to pick up your sports supplements, they're my go-to place personally. So to pick them up or to check them out, head over to discountsupplements.ie and use their discount code BK2019 for 10% off for any podcast listeners. That's BK as in Brian Keane, 2019 for 10% off. That's discountsupplements.ie. Now on to today's episode. Good morning, podcast. If you're not listening to this in the morning, then good afternoon. If you're not listening to this in the afternoon, then good evening. I don't know what time you're listening to this. Anyways, quick introduction to today's podcast with my guest, Ben Greenfield. A lot of you will be familiar with Ben from his podcast, the Ben Greenfield Fitness Podcast, or his recent appearances on the Joe Rogan podcast. Ben has been a leading authority in the world of health, fitness, and biohacking for as long as I can remember. He's one of these people that I've been following for, I'd say, at least 10 years now, and he has done countless things in the health and fitness industry over the years. His book, Beyond Training, was a New York Times bestseller. He's worked with countless professional athletes and CEOs. He's the CEO of the supplement company Keane and writes articles for different magazines. I think I've been reading Ben's articles since I was about 21, 22 with Men's Health and Men's Fitness and different magazines that, shows how old I am. Like back reading magazines back when they were like physical paper. But I used to read his articles, and then online, he's got an amazing blog online. I actually spoke about how when I bought my home sauna, it was his blog that was the tipping point for me that made me go from, I'm going to get a sauna for my house. He's got a great blog, great podcast. He has an unbelievable knowledge on the way the human body works. So his master's is in biomechanics and his master was in exercise physiology. So his understanding on how the human body works is second to none. But he takes a very alternative route and a very ancestral route to the way he approaches his nutrition, his training. So his kind of thought process is he combines and keeps one foot in ancestral times, ancestral wisdom, and then one foot in modern science. So today's episode, we talked a lot about ancestral eating. So based on where you live and how your genes are set up, how eating certain foods and eating certain ways is going to benefit you more than just following a one-size-fits-all diet. We also talk a lot about sleep hygiene. Ben is one of my go-to people when it comes to sleep because of the amount of work he does, particularly with high-ranking CEOs, to improve their sleep hygiene and sleep quality. So we talk about the main factors for sleep. So light, sound, lifestyle, devices, and making sure that you set up your nighttime routine to maximize recovery as an athlete or somebody that trains, or just so that you're going to feel better and more energized the next day so you can make healthier food choices. This is a wide-ranging conversation around those topics of sleep hygiene and nutrition. We'll say wide-ranging. It's actually really focused on sleep hygiene and ancestral eating, but wide-ranging within those two topics. So I'm so grateful to have been able to get Ben on the podcast because his schedule is nuts. If you're following his Instagram and his Instagram stories, he's always flying all over the world, doing different corporate talks, doing different keynote speeches. So I'm so grateful to have been able to get just under an hour of his time. There's parts about 3 or 4 times in the podcast that chops up a small bit. I don't know, is it my internet connection? It might be my internet. I need to look into my internet. But about 2 or 3 times it just chops up. There's certain words that chop up at times, but hopefully it's you mightn't even notice it, but I noticed it listening back. But I tend to be a bit of a perfectionist when it comes to the podcast. So Hopefully it's not too bad, and hopefully you don't find any issue with it. But this is a killer episode. So much value, so much knowledge. Ben is just a fountain of information, and his ability to contextualize things like ancestral eating, his ability to expand on sleep hygiene and why it's so important, it really is second to none. So I hope you enjoyed this episode as much as I enjoyed recording it. Today's episode, my guest, the awesome Ben Greenfield. Hey everybody, welcome to another episode of the podcast. I'm so excited to be joined today by my guest, Ben Greenfield. Ben is the New York Times best-selling author of the book Beyond Training and has a master's degree in exercise physiology and biomechanics. On top of being the CEO of Keane, a company that creates step-by-step solutions from supplements and fitness gear to coaching and consulting for high-achieving athletes, CEOs, and people just looking to improve the quality of their everyday life, Ben has also competed as one of the top-ranked amateur triathletes in the world, completing over 120 races and 13 Ironman triathlons. In 2013 and 2014, Ben was named as one of the world's top 100 most influential people in health and fitness. And by 2015, he was coaching the world's top CEOs, chefs, biohackers, poker players, tennis, motocross and endurance competitors alongside professional athletes from the UFC, the NBA and the NFL. Ben combines ancestral wisdom and modern science to get the best of all worlds, and I cannot wait to dive into all things health, fitness and biohacking with one of the world's leading experts. Ben, welcome to the podcast.
Hey, what's shaking, man?
Ben, tell everybody listening a little bit more about yourself.
What do you want to know?
So where you're based, your lifestyle, I know you've got your kids. Tell everybody a little bit more about your background, the kind of things that make you tick and how your life is set up at the minute.
Okay. I live in Washington State. I have a little property out here on about 10 acres where we raise some Icelandic chickens and some Nigerian dwarf goats and big vegetable gardens and a little fruit orchard. And we do kind of a combination of homeschooling and unschooling and private schooling with the kids. My background is all in exercise physiology and in biomechanics. So I pretty much spend most of my mornings reading research and journals and, primarily focused on nutrition, health, wellness, biohacking, mitochondria, fitness, you name it. And then I write books, I write articles. I'm a supplement formulator, so I work to create new supplement formulations for my company, Keane, and I am putting the finishing touches on a book right now called The Superhuman Prescription. And I also coach a small number of people from around the world with their sleep, their guts, their health, write out their workouts and track their nutrition for them and get on calls with them. So I work as a consultant. And then when I'm not at home, I live on airplanes and in hotel rooms. I travel a lot to speak at conferences all around the world. And typically I'm speaking on, everything from digestion to brain health to nutrition to productivity, you name it. So that's kind of what I do.
I love it. I've been following your stuff for years, Ben, and you're just an absolute fountain of knowledge when it comes to everything to do with the body, biomechanics, health and fitness in general. But tell everybody listening, what got you into fitness first? I know you started at quite a young age. Can you tell us what got you in first and kind of your progression in fitness over the last few years?
Well, I was a tennis player. I played tennis in college. Prior to that point, I wasn't that interested in fitness. I was homeschooled. Spent a lot of time, playing chess and playing the violin and reading fantasy fiction and not really living much of a life immersed in physical culture. But really, tennis was what got me interested in learning a little bit more about how to optimize the human body then even the human brain, because it's kind of like a physical game of chess. And I began to delve into strength conditioning and, how to lift weights and how to eat the right way to fuel the human body, even though at that point for me it was, extra beef on my hamburger from McDonald's. But I was at least kind of thinking about it. And, in college, I got very interested in anatomy and physiology and biochemistry and microbiology and nutrition, pharmaceuticals, biomechanics and physiology. And that's what I really studied hardcore, for 5 years in college. I even kind of went the pre-med route and studied a lot of organic chemistry and physics and biology and chemistry, et cetera, because I was thinking about becoming a doctor. And ultimately, what really got me interested in even what you might deem biohacking, or kind of taking a deep dive into everything from, fringe supplements to training tactics to supplementation, et cetera, was that I spent a couple of years competing as a bodybuilder and had to learn a lot about, how to put a lot of muscle on the human body. I was kind of a hard gainer, skinny guy, and I had to put on about 35 pounds of muscle to compete in bodybuilding while maintaining a pretty low body fat percentage, like around 3 or 4% body fat. And, I started to look into things, like creatine and nitric oxide and macronutrient ratios and water depletion and water loading and sodium depletion and sodium loading and making weight and all these things that you don't really learn in like a typical university nutrition class. And then after that, I kind of pivoted into what I would consider to be the next most unhealthy sport on the face of the planet, Ironman triathlon. And that's kind of the same thing. They say that it's really 4 disciplines. It's swim, bike, run, and eat. And so I had to learn a lot more about kind of supporting the body for endurance instead of strength and power for long periods of time. And that even led me into, very early on, kind of taking a foray into the realm of ketosis and the idea of using ketones as a fuel for the diaphragm or the heart or the brain or even the muscles to a certain extent during physical activity. And so, I started to experiment with that and, just kind of turn my body into a little bit of a human guinea pig for initially, bodybuilding and then triathlon. And now I'm doing a lot more now and kind of what you might argue is a little bit more ancestral when it comes to activities. I'm doing a lot more kind of like breath holding and cold water immersion and tactics for free diving and spearfishing, a lot more kind of stamina and endurance and brain training and even, food preparation because I've taken up the sport of bow hunting. And so, now I'm still racing professionally, also in obstacle course racing for the Spartan organization. So, I still do a lot of like sandbag lifting and, carrying kegs and rocks and doing a lot of like rope climbing and monkey bar and high intensity interval training combined with strength, kind of concurrent strength and endurance training. And so yeah, that's what I do now.
What does your current training look like right now? Because I know that with the Spartan and with all the different things that you do, and you're kind of following, if I'm not mistaken, from what I saw on your Instagram, a kind of a mass gain program at the minute. I think you're up 4 pounds of muscle in 3 weeks or so. What kind of training are you doing at the minute? Like a sample workout of what it looks like.
Almost like kind of like a bodybuilding program or a mass gain program, but more of like an athletically driven mass gain program, like all focused on functional moves with a lot of high intensity cardio sprinkled in. So what you'd call concurrent strength and endurance training. So a typical training session for me would be like kind of a bastardization of like a 5x5 protocol, where I'm doing those full body lifts in a 5x5, some type of a row, like a seated row or a bent row, some kind of a deadlift or a squat, kind of like a three times a week full body strength training routine. But during that strength training routine, I'm often sprinkling in things like Tabata sets, explosive activities after each of the strength activities, meaning I might do a set of heavy barbell squats, but that's followed by box jumps or lunge jumps, or I might do a set of a bench press or a chest press, but that's followed up with an explosive activity like burpees, for example. So it's a lot of kind of back and forth between strength and kind of more functional explosive moves. And then on the off days, a lot more of a focus on core training. A lot of planking, a lot of crawling, a lot of kind of like more like animal flow or gymnastics moves. Climbing rope, swinging from monkey bars, etc. And then just about everything else that I do is walking. A lot of sunlight exposure. And typically several times per week, a lot of heat, like in the sauna, and a lot of cold, like cold plunges after the sauna. So it's essentially like strength training 3 times a week with high intensity interval training and functional explosive moves mixed in with the strength. And then a lot of low level physical activity like walking. And a lot of kind of core moves and kind of more functional moves on the in between days between the strength training sessions, and then a lot of sauna and a lot of cold.
I'm curious. It's funny you mentioned the sauna there, because it was actually I bought a sauna for my house recently, and it was your blog post on the website that was my my tipping point. The thing that was like, okay, I'm going to get a sauna after reading your blog post on it. What does your heat therapy and cold therapy look like? How do you do it in terms of time? How much length of time you do in the cold and the heat? Do you combine the two? Do you do them separately? What do they generally look like?
I primarily use infrared because I like the fact that, in a full spectrum infrared sauna, you get the benefits of the far infrared in terms of the heating effect and the sweat induction. And then the near infrared kind of penetrates the tissue, and the cells and the mitochondria can absorb those light photons, and it's very therapeutic and can cause increased ATP production by the electron transport chain in the mitochondria. So you kind of get the best of both worlds. And I'll typically, because I have a very large sauna, it's made by a company called Clear Light. It's called a sanctuary sauna. So it's designed for 4 people, but that means that one person, if I remove all the benches and everything from it, one person can do like yoga or stretching, arm swings, breath work, etc. So I'm typically in the sauna 3 to 4 times a week for about 30 minutes. That's kind of the sweet spot for me. And that's always finished up with a cold plunge. And what I did was I just have like kind of a very small above ground pool that I have outside that I keep very cold. And I'll usually go in there for about 5 to 7 minutes after the sauna and do like some underwater swimming, some breath holds, kind of splash around a little bit, get the cold therapy. I always finish up with a quick dip into the hot tub usually. And I'm usually doing that about 3 to 4 times a week. And if you do it in the morning, you get a lot of energy for the day because you produce a lot of nitric oxide and it's a lot of blood flow. It's very good for the vagus nerve, so it kind of tweaks the nervous system a little bit and allows you to be a little bit more resilient to stress the rest of the day. And then if you do it at night, it's very, very good for deep sleep cycles. You fall asleep more quickly, and you don't have to have a sauna to do that nightly thing. You could just take a hot cold contrast shower where you shower and you switch from 20 seconds of cold to 10 seconds of hot, and do like 10 rounds of that. And I'll do that sometimes when I'm traveling and I still want to get some of the blood flow and the nitric oxide and the nerve benefits from heat cold therapy. But that's generally how I do things.
Yeah, that works really well. Even before I got my sauna, like a really, really hot bath for 5, 7, 10 minutes, followed by like an ice cold shower, and your sleep is just incredible. I think that segues perfectly to the next thing I want to talk about. And I've spoken on the podcast in the past how I'm naturally quite a poor sleeper. And personally, I use a range of different things like blue light blocking glasses, some CBD oil, noise machines, etc. And that generally helps me. However, your nighttime routine goes a little bit beyond that. Can you tell everybody listening a little bit about your nighttime routine and what you do with people you work with to help improve their sleep quality, everything to do with that?
So basic sleep hygiene means, you pay attention to light, and that begins early in the day. As much natural sunlight exposure, or if you're unable to get out into the sunlight, blue light exposure or infrared light exposure. Like I've got, light panels in my office and, glasses that I wear that produce a little bit of light. And also, I have like a device that goes in your ears that can produce light for your ears. And this would be if I can't get outside in the sunshine, or if I'm traveling, or my circadian rhythm needs an extra light boost in the morning. For me, a good night of sleep later on always starts with the morning. and during the rest of the day, really as much natural light exposure as possible. Sunlight's best, but if you don't have sunlight, you can get like infrared light panels. Like I've got a couple made by a company called Juve. You can get like head-worn devices, like the glasses that I wear are called the retimer glasses. The light-producing device that you can put in your ears is called the human charger. And so you're just kind of trying to charge your body up with light early in the day. And then as the day ends and the sun begins to set, you generally want to block as much artificial light or blue light as possible. So it's kind of the opposite strategy, right? You wear blue light blocking glasses like you alluded to. On all my computers, I've got a software program called Iris installed that I can switch to sleep mode. So it kind of makes the screen appear red. I have the same setting on my phone, so I can switch it to red screen at night. And what I'll usually do is, even during the day, if I'm visiting like a mall or whatever, a doctor's office, or I'm in the airport, I'll even wear some of these blue light blocking glasses during the day to limit the amount of really like bright fluorescent, like LED or blue light exposure, because that flicker can kind of cause a disruption of melatonin production later on in the day. So in my bedroom, I don't really have many lights. I just use red incandescent light bulbs in the bedroom. So it's not very disruptive when it comes to sleep, or if I got to flip the light on to go use the restroom at night, or I'm brushing my teeth before bed or whatever. I'm just very cognizant of trying to simulate as much kind of like, what you would consider if you were looking at it from an ancestral standpoint, kind of like torchlight or firelight at night. And I've found the best way to do that is with red incandescent bulbs. I mean, you could use candles and stuff like that, but it's easier to just flip on the bulbs. So it's basically, with light, it comes down to as much natural light exposure as possible early in the day, as much light mitigation as possible later on in the day. And then when it comes to like modern LED and fluorescent bulbs, just being cognizant of how much you're exposed to those during the day. And if you do work in an office, or you're out and about and you're in a lot of places like a grocery store or an airport or a mall that has a lot of these really bright fluorescent LED lights, you wear something like the blue light blocking glasses to mitigate some of that exposure. So light is one. Another very important part of sleep hygiene is, and when it comes to light, one other thing to bear in mind is just during sleep, your skin has a lot of photoreceptors on it. So, a lot of people will wear a light blocking mask, which I do, to kind of keep light off the eyes while I'm asleep. But you got to be aware of the rest of the light in the bedroom. So I make sure, any devices are off in the room that are producing light, like computers or power bars or whatever. And then I also have blackout curtains, on the windows. So it's very dark. And I try and simulate that as much as possible when I travel. Like when I check into a hotel room, I'll, unplug the TV and, unplug the alarm clock. And, if it's one of those rooms like in, Las Vegas or whatever, that has one of those little built-in iPads where you can order breakfast, I'll turn off that iPad and close the curtains and just try to make the room as dark as possible. So that's light. And then you mentioned you play sounds, and that's another part of sleep hygiene is sound, like the absence of sound. So if you do live in a loud area, or you have a partner who might get up earlier than you, or who is making sounds at night, or maybe your partner snores, or you have kids who get up early in the morning, or a barking dog, or like us, we have roosters, who want to get up at the god awful hour of like 4:30 a.m. Like I have an app on my phone called Sleep Stream, and that will produce kind of background noise that covers up the noise produced by the environment around me. And the phone's always in airplane mode, but I'll just play that Sleep Stream kind of on the nightstand. And I actually use, based on research, so there's a few different settings for noise. Like there's like white noise and brown noise. And turns out for deep sleep cycles, pink noise is kind of like the best setting to choose if you have an app that will produce kind of background noise. So I just use that Sleep Stream app and set it in pink noise setting to kind of cover up a lot of sounds while I'm asleep. And that combined with the phone earplug seems to work pretty well. And then, of course, the phones are off, so there's no background dings or anything like that. So there's sound and there's light. And then another one is temperature. And we kind of already alluded to, like this, the doing a bath at night followed by a lukewarm or a cold shower, or doing like a sauna followed by a quick cold plunge. And the body goes into its deep sleep cycles and also repairs and recovers itself far more readily at night when temperature is regulated. And so you want to go to bed slightly cold. Like I always, in a hotel room or in my own home, set the temperature to about 64 to 65 degrees Fahrenheit for an evening of sleep. There's also this company that sells like a very comfortable pad that you can put underneath your top sheet, and it circulates cold water under your body while you're asleep. And I found that to be very beneficial. That one's called a chili pad. And that, they even make one where, like, if you have a big bed, you can just get kind of like a double unit. And so each partner can choose their own sleeping temperature. And I found that to be really useful. One thing that's also interesting with sleep is if you keep your feet warm, it allows for more blood to be shunted to your core to keep your core cool. So you kind of like get everything cold, but then you put on socks, like wool socks. So you keep the feet warm, but the rest of the body cool. And that seems to really help also. A big heavy meal or a hard exercise session within about 2 to 3 hours prior to bedtime will cause you to go to bed pretty warm. So if your schedule dictates that you do eat dinner later, or you can only hit the gym closer to bed, you really want to prioritize that whole cold shower thing, or lukewarm shower if a cold shower is too much for you, before bed, to really get the temperature back down if you do have to eat a late evening meal, or you have a later evening exercise session. So you just need to be aware that the body does really well with cold. So you have your light, you have sound, and you have temperature. And then the last thing to bear in mind would just be lifestyle, right? Like there's no TV in our bedroom. There's no laptops in our bedroom. The bedroom is saved for sleep or for sex. Even the books that I read, like the books up on my nightstand, they're either, things like Harry Potter and Game of Thrones and good fiction books, or else like more spiritual and meditation books, like books on the spiritual disciplines or fasting, silence, solitude, devotionals, books that really don't have anything to do with business and work, or in my case, books about fitness or nutrition. Like none of those are in the bedroom. So you don't want your bedroom to be a place where your body goes into work mode, and you definitely don't want to do something like check your email right before you go to bed, or do anything that would put your body into work mode. And that's something that a lot of people, I think, they'll get the temperature set up and it'll be a nice dark room and there'll be no sound, but then they'll like check their email, or they'll bang out a few quick things on their laptop while they're laying in bed, or they'll have that book, that's about their business or something their boss wanted them to read. And you don't want to do any of that in the bedroom for an ideal night of sleep. So those are the basics for sleep hygiene. And then finally, when it comes to, nutrition or supplementation, a little bit of carbohydrates with dinner. A lot of people will avoid carbohydrates with dinner. They're afraid they'll get fat or have high blood sugar going to bed. But especially if you've stayed physically active during the day. And, I typically work out sometime like later afternoon, or go on a walk, or do something that renders my body pretty insulin sensitive. And because of that, I have carbohydrates with dinner, typically about 100 to 200 grams of carbohydrates with dinner. And that really helps your body produce serotonin and melatonin when you sleep. So, going to bed not in like a completely carbohydrate depleted state can be helpful for sleep. And then also, from a supplementation standpoint, I don't take a lot of supplements before sleep, but like you, I'm a big fan of CBD. So I'll typically take about 60 to 100 milligrams of CBD before bed. And it's important to realize, a lot of CBD is just, dosing. If you look at the label, it says like 10 milligrams on there. And so you need to be aware of using CBD for sleep, that, based on research, you need to take a little bit more often than what the bottle or the label of whatever supplement you're using says. But 60 to 100 milligrams of CBD seems to be a sweet spot. If I'm traveling a lot, I'll use small doses of melatonin, anywhere from 0.3 melatonin, but that's not an everyday thing. That's only if I've been traveling and I kind of need to reset my circadian rhythm a little bit. And melatonin is also useful if you are in a situation where maybe you've gone to a movie at night, or something like that, or it's a date night and you're out later and you just need a little bit of melatonin to kind of combat some of the effects of the bright light late at night. It can help with that as well, because the bright light is what suppresses your melatonin production. And then The only other thing is, like, if you find yourself waking up at like later hours, say you wake up at 2 a.m. or 4 a.m. or whatever, anything that produces a little bit of inhibitory neurotransmitters can be helpful in helping you get back to sleep. The primary inhibitory neurotransmitter is GABA. It's called gamma-aminobutyric acid. And there are certain supplements that you could keep next to your nightstand at night. So if you do wake up during the night, they can help you to fall asleep more quickly. This would be like passion flower extract or skullcap extract, or even like another dose of CBD, or even just a supplement that's just pure GABA, right? Like pH GABA, which can cross the blood-brain barrier and help you to fall asleep more quickly. So you could keep something like that next to the nightstand. And then the only other thing that comes to mind in response to your question would be, in this whole realm of biohacking, there are certain technologies that you can use that can help you get to sleep. And probably the two that I find most interesting and that I also use, one would be called pulsed electromagnetic field frequencies, or also abbreviated PEMF. So, when you're walking outside, say barefoot on the surface of the earth, you're getting exposed to a range of natural electromagnetic frequencies that our ancestors would have experienced when walking outside, wearing animal skins on their feet rather than big built up rubber-soled shoes, or, camping or sleeping outside, or working outside, gardening and touching the weeds and the dirt and the soil. We don't get exposed to a lot of those frequencies, but they tend to be very good, especially at night, at increasing like delta brainwaves or decreasing stressful beta brainwaves. And so they actually make mats, like PEMF mats, that you can put on your bed. And I know I already talked about one mat called a chili pad, but you can easily like stack mats on top of each other. And
do you lie on those mats then, Ben, or do you go on them before bed? Do you literally sleep on them all night? How do you use both of those things?
Yeah, I sleep on one all night. It's called a body. I interviewed a guy on my website. If you go to bengreenfieldfitness.com and you do a search, I think his name is spelled Pollock, Pawluk, Dr. William Pollock. And he has one mat. There's not many out there that will like stay on all night, but he makes one that stays on all night. I think it's called either a body balance or a biobalance mat. And I have one of those, and it's just kind of like right on top, or I'm sorry, right underneath that chili pad mat I talked about. So I've kind of got like two mats, and it sounds like a lot, but you don't even notice, unless I guess you're like the princess and the pea. You don't really even you don't notice these mats underneath you, but they do a really good job, that 1-2 combo of like the cold water and the PEMF. So PEMF, that's an interesting therapy, interesting device. It's actually a very cool technology. You can use PEMF devices for inflammation and for injuries, but also for sleep onset. And then the other device that I think is kind of cool, it's been used in like psychological therapy and biofeedback and stuff like that for a long time, but they're called vagus nerve stimulators. They actually stimulate your vagus nerve to kind of like calm itself down or activate the parasympathetic nervous system when you're stressed out. So there's a lot of devices like that. Like there's one called the Nu Calm, that's spelled NU Calm. There's another one called the Circadia that's made by a company called Fisher Wallace. And these are typically like little electrodes that you put on either side of the head. And you feel like this mild, almost like tingling sensation wherever you place it. Like typically it's on the side of like the temporal lobe on either side of the head, or sometimes back behind the ears. There's like one electrode on one side and one electrode on the other side. And these they shut down cortisol dramatically and just kind of lull you into this sleepy state. And if you have a lot of trouble falling asleep, or again, like if you wake up at night, you put one of these on and you fall asleep a lot more quickly. I find those devices are actually very useful too when you're trying to sleep in a stressful situation, like on an airplane or a long train ride or a car ride or something like that. Those are really, really good for those type of situations as well. So yeah, those are a few of the major sleep tips I can think of for you.
What got you interested in the whole sleep hygiene side of things? Was it that you were a naturally poor sleeper, or was it just your knowledge on the body and how we recover and sleep? What kind of was the catalyst for you delving into everything to do with sleep hygiene?
Mostly for me, it was kind of like being a hard charging athlete who traveled a lot, right? Like always outside of my time zones. That's just hard with sleep. I remember when I used to race Ironman triathlon, I'd have some days, where you'd be training like, 4 or 5 hours and your body's just wound up and your gut's kind of bloated because you got to eat like 6,000 calories a day and you're kind of like wired, but what it was, tired but wired, where you're tired but your body won't fall asleep. And I remember like back then, like early on in the day, I'd like pop Valium before bed or Ambien, which is horrible for your sleep architecture and just totally disrupts your deep sleep cycles. It's like, taking a sledgehammer to your head, but you fall asleep. It's not quality sleep, but you fall asleep. And I thought, well, geez, like, compared to like Valium or Ambien or ZyQuil or any of these other, highly disruptive pharmaceuticals, there's got to be better ways. So I would say about 8 years ago, I really started to kind of study up on how to naturally enhance sleep. And for me, it just started from being a very hard charging, high achieving athlete who traveled a lot, who needed to figure out a way to get a good night of sleep and still be productive the next day. And, now I've got great sleep. I sleep about 8 to 9 hours a night, or on nights where I'll sleep 6 to 7 hours, I'll take an afternoon nap. My sleep cycles are good. I use an Aura ring to track my sleep cycles, and they're typically quite good. And but for me, it just started off being an athlete who travels a lot and needed to figure out ways to kind of like fight that uphill battle against getting a good night of sleep when you're not in your kind of your home turf every night.
You mentioned there about like hammering in about 6,000 calories a day when you're training for Ironman. What does your nutrition look like currently in terms of your fasting protocols, the macro splits? How are you approaching nutrition at the minute? Is it more just intuitive? And what does a daily eating plan look like for you at the minute?
Well, before I reply to you, it's important to understand that, what works for me doesn't necessarily work for everybody else, because there are a lot of variations in our ancestry, and people who come from a sub-Saharan African or Southeast Asian ancestry, they're going to do better with rice and fish and fruits and higher amount of starches. The closer to the equator, you tend to be more insulin sensitive, you produce more vitamin D, you can get away with more sugar, more carbohydrates, and perhaps less salt. And then if you look at like a Northern European, for example, there's a lot more like salted and pickled and fermented and cured foods, a lot more kind of like fatty, like red meats. Typically, you've got the persistence of the lactose gene, so you can tolerate more dairy, eggs, things like that, and less of the fruit, less of the starch. So it really depends to a certain extent your ancestry, also your blood work or your gut work. A lot of people have yeast or parasites or fungus or H. pylori or Clostridium difficile or small intestine bacterial overgrowth or whatever, all of which can be tested pretty easily. But that would dictate, do you eat fermentable carbohydrates or not? Do you need to do, a diet that's more healing for the gut, like a paleo diet or an autoimmune diet, and so it's different strokes for different folks. The way that I eat is I eat in a very ancestral way. I have primarily Northern European genes, and so typically I'm eating a lot of eggs, fish, good natural organic red meat, a lot of fermented foods like kimchi and sauerkrauts and like good raw fermented dairy like yogurts and good like hard artisanal cheeses made from a good organic, typically like a goat source. I do a lot of like bone broths and really, I guess if you could put a label on the diet that I eat, probably the thing it's closest to would be almost like a Weston A. Price type of diet where, I don't eliminate dairy. I do grains like quinoa and amaranth and millet and slow fermented sourdough bread. I eat a lot of wild plants and herbs and spices. Anything like legumes, seeds, nuts, grains, those are always soaked or sprouted or fermented or, in some way treated to render the natural plant defense mechanisms less able to harm the human gut. because that's one of the issues with like a paleo diet or carnivore diet. It's like don't eat dairy or don't eat grains or don't eat plants because they can cause damage. As long as you're smarter than the plant, when you ferment your dairy and you soak your chickpeas and you cook or boil or steam your raw rough vegetables. I mean, a lot of this stuff can be rendered digestible. You just have to cook it the right way. So, I do what you might call a lot of slow food prep. If I'm going to have yogurt, I'll buy, like coconut milk and mix probiotics up in it and stir that up and add a little bit of acacia fiber, a little bit of sugar, and put that in a food dehydrator for a day so it can kind of ferment at about 100 degrees, and for me, that's yogurt. I don't go buy, Dannon yogurt or Yoplait from the grocery store. So it all depends really on the way that you treat your food. So typically, in the morning, I'll have a smoothie, just because that's fast for me, and usually that's got like some bone broth, some ice, some lemon juice, some kind of a protein, typically I'll do like a hemp or a pea or a rice protein powder. I'll throw a little bit of like a dark chocolate powder in there and blend that up and add some superfoods like some macadamia nuts or spirulina or chlorella or some coconut flakes or some cacao nibs. And so, it's almost like my own homemade version of an acai bowl for breakfast. I just enjoy that, and occasionally I'll take a break from that and do like, eggs and bacon, or, my children make some wonderful fermented sourdough waffles or, overnight oats or something like that. But 9 times out of 10 for me, it's just easy to do a smoothie. And on a very busy day, I'll literally just do like coffee or tea and blend that up with some ghee or some coconut oil and some sea salt and cinnamon and stevia and just sip on a hot beverage during work. Lunch for me, I'll usually just eat a lot of wild plants, herbs, and spices like, kale, cilantro, rosemary, thyme, parsley, and, top that with some sardines or anchovies or mackerels, a lot of olive oil, some pumpkin seeds or pine nuts or macadamia nuts or something like that. I don't really snack a lot. You asked about fasting. I fast 12 to 16 hours every day, really only eat about 3 times a day. So I've got long breaks between meals. So my blood sugar stays stable and my gut isn't constantly stressed with needing to digest foods. But a dinner is typically like, some kind of a good meat, like a ribeye steak or a nice cut of wild salmon with some roasted vegetables or roasted squash or something like that. A little bit of sourdough bread or rice or quinoa or amaranth or millet, often a glass of red wine and a bit of dark chocolate, or I like to homemake ice cream, with things like avocados and coconut milk and cacao powder, and so I'll typically make some ice cream, and and that's typically it. And then if I do snack, typically the only thing I'll snack on, if you want to call this a snack, would be, in a pre-workout scenario or sometimes a post-workout scenario. I use like essential amino acids. My company actually makes a really nice essential amino acids blend. It's just called Aminos. So I use that. Typically pre-workout or post-workout, just like 10 to 20 grams of amino acids or essential amino acids. And then I'll sometimes use ketones, like ketone salts or ketone esters, just because they offer me a nice stable form of fuel that lasts a long time. So, sometimes I'll stir those up with some amino acids, if I've got a tough afternoon workout and I'm kind of hungry and, I know dinner's not going to be till later, I'll do something like that as like a pre-workout or post-workout. But, aside from that, I just do a lot of coffees, a lot of teas, a lot of kind of non-calorie based beverages like, sparkling water or, occasionally kombucha, things like that. So that's generally what my diet looks like.
Yeah, I remember, I think it was the most recent episode of Rogan that you were on where you were speaking about the misconceptions about, certain diets, about cutting out foods that you need to render them digestible. And you can actually, if you don't be lazy about it, you can actually eat most of the foods that you want. Is there any other misconception in nutrition or diet that you come across quite regularly? I'm sure that's one where it's like, well, cut out all these foods, as opposed to, well, if you ferment them and render them digestible, they'll be fine. Is there any other regular misconception with nutrition that you see across your channels, on on your podcast that come in, or via social media? Any other misconceptions around that area? Yeah,
I'd say 2 would be, first of all, that carbohydrates are bad. a lot of people will say that. But I mean, if you look at the majority of the research studies on carbohydrate intake, whether it's a high carb diet or a low carb diet, if we're talking about weight loss and metabolic parameters, if the diet is comprised of healthy foods, a high carb diet comprised of blueberry, pumpkin, white rice, and some melon, and like red wine and dark chocolate, and a lot of these things that would be considered more ancestral forms of carbohydrates. You look at folks like the Okinawans or folks eating a Mediterranean diet, and in many cases, it's not a low carb diet, but the carbohydrate intake seems to be mitigated by kind of low-level physical activity spread throughout the day and a very active lifestyle. So I would say, especially if you live an active lifestyle and you're walking a lot, and especially if you're out in the sunshine, or you live near the equator and you're swimming and you're lifting weights, or you're gardening, or you maybe have a physical job like you're a construction worker or a painter, carbohydrates really don't seem to be much of an issue. A lot of people vilify them unnecessarily. And sure, I'm not a fan of high fructose corn syrup and packaged and processed foods that are, non-nutrient dense forms of carbohydrates. But, real recognizable carbohydrates that our ancestors have eaten, since the agricultural revolution. I mean, a lot of those are just fine. So I think carbohydrates are sometimes unfairly vilified. If you live a very sedentary lifestyle, you're a cubicle worker, you're not moving much, you're not taking, your 10 to 15,000 steps a day, et cetera, you'd probably benefit from some amount of carbohydrate mitigation. But in the context of an active lifestyle, carbohydrates aren't that big of an issue for most folks. And then the same thing could be said for ketosis. A lot of people think ketosis is like this magical cure-all for everything from weight loss to cognitive function to longevity. But the fact is, a lot of people, they have like the ApoE34 or ApoE44 gene, which dictates that, a lot of these coconut oils and butters and coconut manna and a lot of these solid fats, they actually have an inflammatory response to those that can increase the risk for atherosclerosis. A lot of people, they don't produce a lot of bile in the liver or store it and release it from the gallbladder. And maybe before they do something like a high fat diet, they actually need to heal their liver and their gallbladder and do a cleanse and do a fast to actually clean all that up. Other people have familial hypercholesteremia, which dictates that they might do better on, say, like a Katavan Islander diet, rich in coconut meat and some citrus fruits and some rice and seaweed and fatty cuts of fish versus, say, like putting a stick of butter in their coffee and having coconut oil with ribeye steak for lunch, and so it just comes down to dietary individualization and also eating like your ancestors. And if I could give people a few resources for that, there are good books out there. Like Dr. Daphne Miller has a good book called The Jungle Effect. Stephen Lee has a great book called The 100 Million Year Diet. Dr. Michael Smith has a good book called Return to an Ancestral Diet. And when you look at a lot of these diets, they're based on seasonal and local eating like your ancestors, incorporating periods of fasting, not eating the same thing every day, day in, day out, but instead paying attention to what is being grown locally and in season, eating with family or with friends, or at least in a very rested state, not when you're driving in a car or hunched over your laptop typing. I mean, no matter what your macronutrient ratio is of proteins and carbohydrates and fats, we at least know that there are prevailing characteristics we see in a healthy diet. Control how many times your blood sugar goes up and down during the day. Eat with other people, fellowship and have family dinners. Engage in fasting. Eat seasonally. Eat locally. Include lots of wild plants, herbs, and spices. Drink moderately, 1 to 2 glasses of alcohol per day. Have coffees and teas and tannin-rich beverages spread throughout the day. I mean, these are the dietary principles that seem to work no matter what kind of diet you're eating when it comes to your protein-fat carb ratios.
I love it. As I mentioned at the beginning, Ben, you're an absolute fountain of knowledge when it comes to the body, nutrition, sleep, everything. I just have one final question before I let you go. You do so many different things. I know you've got the new book, you're speaking, you've got Keane, you do your endurance events, you just do countless things. What are you most excited about right now?
I'm putting the finishing touches on a book that's it's almost 600 pages long, enormous book, 8.5 by 11, big, beautiful hardcover title. I think I mentioned it earlier. It's called The Superhuman Prescription. It's not going to come out for a few months, but if people go to bengreenfieldfitness.com and they subscribe for the newsletter over there, which is free, but that's what I'm kind of pouring my heart and my soul into right now, is this brand new book that spans the gamut of optimizing your body, your mind, your spirit. It's got everything in there, from fitness tactics to smart drugs and nootropics to, spiritual optimization to sound healing to stem cells to anti-aging and longevity. It's all in there. So I'm working behind the scenes on that for a long time, and I'm incredibly stoked to have that be coming out here pretty soon.
That sounds like a mammoth. When did you start work on that, Ben?
About 2 years ago.
Amazing. And I'll put that link up in the show notes. I'm going to be ordering that. I can't recommend all of Ben's stuff enough, and I'll put that link up, and Ben, I will tag it across on my stories. I'll have my copy come when the book comes out, and I just want to acknowledge you firstly for your time, and for being a thought leader in the world in health and fitness. You're one of the first people to really put fitness on the map, particularly in the podcasting world. And when I see our downloads hitting 90, 100,000 a month, I'm so grateful for the path that you trailblazed before us. So Ben, thank you so much for everything you do, and thank you so much for your time, and I cannot wait to read the new book.
Awesome. Thanks for having me on, man.
So that wraps up today's interview with my awesome guest, Ben Greenfield. Man, I could listen to him talk about sleep hygiene all day and ancestral eating. They were the two topics that I really wanted to cover, because when I consume Ben's content on, either other podcasts, his own podcast or his blog, they were the things that I really kind of hammer in on, because his ability to contextualize it and talk through so many different areas through supplements, devices, the way the body works in general. I just love the way he puts that information across. So I hope you enjoyed it as much as I enjoyed recording it. If you've listened this far and you're in the outro, I freaking love you. You're awesome. But can you do me one more thing? If you enjoyed this episode, please take a screenshot of it and tag me and Ben on your Instagram story. Again, the more people that are listening to the podcast, the more people that see it, the more awesome guests I can get on, and it'll just be a massive thank you from me if you can do that. So if you enjoyed today's episode, just take a screenshot and be sure to tag me and Ben Greenfield on your Instagram story. Thank you so much for listening. Catch you all next week with another awesome guest.